Solutions House. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating in this little experiment that we're doing about climate literacy and comedy together. My name is Alison Smart.
I'm Spencer Glendon. I also want to have a special thank you for whoever chose to put this facial expression of me on the screen. It's like Billy Idol Lost. We're getting Google Maps right, and Alison is really unsure about whether she's chosen a good partner for this endeavor.
Yeah. So we started an initiative, a climate literacy initiative called Probable Futures, and at Probable Futures we aim to do two things: democratize climate science and build societal climate literacy, and that's what we're going to do today. And we are joined by some wonderful, talented friends, funny friends who, frankly, like to interrupt us on a regular basis.
It's true.
So
I wish I jumped in earlier to interrupt.
Yeah.
To prove the point. Hey everyone, this is Pratima. She writes for The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
Oh, hi.
Very exciting.
Thank you. And this is Esteban. He had a show on Vice once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Good silence. The show, as you might have guessed per your reaction, was canceled.
Yes, and I am on strike, so we have time.
We have, here, and we would love to be paid up front. We need it. Oh God.
Yeah.
We're happy. No, this is delighted. We're happy.
Thanks for being here. So we started Probable Futures in part because we saw a big problem with the way that climate futures were being portrayed in public discourse, which mainly was like this. So we have two binary futures here when considering climate change. One is continued stability, but with some electric cars and more modern architecture, where climate change is kind of magically solved in the background, but without really much disruption and without many changes to our lives or our behavior. And one which is perpetual apocalypse.
Yeah.
We have talked.
We choose
one.
Got it.
Pretty
easy choice.
One order of one for two.
Yeah, one order of one for two. It does look like the house from Parasite.
Yes, we like that about
And
it. Yeah.
even seeing the film, I would prefer one. I know how it ends. I'm taking one.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but number one is not accurate. It's no longer really available to us because we are in a changing climate. We will continue to be in a changing climate to some extent for some time, even in the best case scenarios. But number two is completely avoidable, and it is a ways off.
Okay, because it looks from what I see, like humans are hunted for sport, and I was bad at track.
Yeah.
So that's not for me.
Two is it feels like a lot of moisture, which is good, just for the skin. So it's growing on me.
Yeah, I have frizzy hair. Bad for me. No.
You're right. We're going back to one.
Yeah. There's not enough Garnier in the world for me to live in that world.
Well, this binary view of the future is not particularly helpful. What we need to do is explore the probable futures in between, the realistic probable futures in between, and work towards this: living well in a changing climate. It's not a framing that we typically hear in the climate conversation, but it's something that we really need to start talking about seriously. And we need to start talking about it because we need to prepare our communities for the kinds of change that we are going to experience in the coming decades. And you may say, well, humans are adaptable. We've experienced a lot of change in our time on this earth. We've experienced a lot of change just in the past several decades. And that's true. But for the past 12,000 years, the change that we have experienced has been within a very specific set of conditions, which is this. So what we're looking at here is a graph of the global temperature history of the Earth. And the graph starts at the dawn of civilization, 12,000 years ago, in about 9,500 BCE. Around that time, communities around the world in totally disconnected places settled and started to build civilization. And so this is the global average temperature that has been experienced in that time of civilization. So the way to understand this graph is that the global average temperature for each of these 12,000 years is being shown on the graph here, but it's being compared to the global average temperature of the late 19th century. So the way to understand the graph is the closer the data point is to 0, the more stable the global average temperature was. So this is climate stability. This is what climate stability looks like. But what about before 12,000 years ago? Because humans have been around for about 200,000 years. Our earliest ancestors emerged in Africa around 200,000 years ago. But for about 190,000 of those years, humans were mobile. We were a hunting and gathering nomadic species. And looking at this chart really helps us understand why. The climate changed dramatically in those 190,000 years. And that just isn't conducive to settling into one place. What is conducive to that is here, this climate stability. Because what the stable climate allowed us to do was know that the nice places were going to stay nice. Know that we could invest somewhere and plan and practice agriculture and build a society around the climatic patterns that happened in that place. We could build societies around a place with monsoons. We could build a society in the Arctic because we knew what to expect and what to plan for. And then over time, long-term communities formed. And those communities, over time, would have a shared set of beliefs and expression of cultures. And then those cultures eventually formalized into governments, and governments built infrastructure. Everything from roads and bridges to laws and policies that really enabled large groups of people to coordinate. And that literally and figuratively paved the way for industry and markets until we had a proliferation of specializations on top of that. So all of the really complex society that we live in today was built upon a stable climate.
And we are somewhere in there.
Yeah, comedians are in there.
Comedians are in there. Which
Somewhere.
also doesn't make sense because if everything's built on a stable climate, in our experience, that's not what comedians come from. We would like to see where the line is for daddy issues.
Like, is there like a lime slice for like introvert but needs attention?
Yeah, or a lime slice that like bad at intimacy.
Yeah,
but
like
yeah.
fear of intimacy, or
Yeah.
like fear of being fully known.
But also talks about mindfulness a lot.
Yeah. Is that a lime
That's
slice
the-
that
I
we
think
can?
they're tucked in there.
Oh, okay, good.
Perfect.
I think they're tucked in there a little bit.
So this climate was stable, which you now appreciate made planning easy. What it literally meant was if you knew the past, you could anticipate the future. And we built all these standards and norms around this. We built all these expectations. We literally built our cultures around it. But it wasn't just stable. It was perfect for us. So actually weren't very many humans before this climate stabilized. And when it stabilized at a perfect temperature for human beings. Because one piece of infrastructure that humans were slow to develop was the good remote. But we're going to talk about temperature now, and in particular what's called wet bulb temperature.
Wet bulb.
Wet bulb.
Wet bulb. Make some noise.
Okay, no. I should say that I don't know what wet bulb is because my safe search is turned on.
And I don't know what a wet bulb is since college.
Yeah.
So this is actually data on our screen. It's a map of the frequency of wet bulb, but we're going to talk, I think we need a little bit of basic education. Probable Futures is a climate literacy initiative. We're going to learn some new words. Wet bulb is one of them.
Wet bulb.
So the thing is, we're warm-blooded. In fact, everyone in this room is experiencing this right at this moment. I'm wearing fewer clothes than when I arrived, and I would prefer to wear fewer than I've got on now. We are hot-blooded animals. We need to offload heat. And at a certain level of temperature and humidity, we can't offload that heat. It gets harder and harder for our bodies to work. Because no matter how hot we may all think we are, we're actually all the same temperature. And we're going to show you more graphs and images where all the temperatures are around the human body temperature, because it's really relevant for us. And if the air can't cool us down, bad things happen. And there's a way to think about this, and that is wet bulb temperature. It's a mixture of heat and humidity, and it's got a limit for us. At 35 degrees centigrade or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, if it's 100% humidity and that temperature, even in the shade, even with a breeze, even with a drink, even the most fit person here would expire. And it wouldn't take very long. And down from death is extreme danger, which means young people, children who have trouble offloading heat. People who are older, people of any compromise. This is lethal for them. Down to danger, extreme caution. All right, we're in a room that feels hot, right? What's a guess for what the wet bulb temperature is in here? I actually calculated it before I got on stage. So wet bulb temperature is actually a very literal definition. A thermometer has a wet cloth wrapped around it, and it is waved in the air, and it's the temperature that reads on the thermometer. And so what it does is actually measures how much cooler evaporation makes the sensation of the temperature. So in 100% humidity, we'll take 28 degrees C, 82 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's 100% humidity and 82 in here, and we had a wet cloth on a thermometer and waved it around, it would still say 82, because the cloth would not evaporate to cool it down. But if the humidity were lower, 75%, some of that water would evaporate from the cloth into the atmosphere. The atmosphere would accept that moisture, and in doing so would cool the cloth, so the thermometer would actually read a lower temperature. And if it was very humid, very dry rather, there would be a lot of evaporation from the cloth. So the thermometer would literally read, if it were 115 degrees outside, and it were 25% humidity, and you waved that wet bulb thermometer in the air, the thermometer would read 82.
Wet bulb.
Are you with me? Sure. Okay. So now that you asked that helpful question, what do you think the wet bulb temperature is in this room at this moment that you're so enjoying? Somebody's got to guess. 65. This is 65. These are really high numbers. We're a long way from 78, which is at the bottom of this chart. So what was that graph about? What was that map? That map was the number of days in a year when the temperature was 0.5 degrees C above that little line, which happens to be what it was from 1971 to 2000. So in the late 20th century, we were roughly at 0.5 above that pre-industrial average, well within that green band. And at that temperature, how many days a year in all of these places had a single day that passed that threshold? And everything that's gray on a map is a 0 for probable futures. It actually is the case that there is a small green spot on the Persian Gulf where one day a year it might happen. But this is not 35, this is 32. This is extreme danger. Extreme danger never happened. What does this mean? We can live wherever we want in this world. Humans could live everywhere. Nowhere was too hot for the human body.
We'd like to say we're sorry for laughing at wet bulb.
Yeah. We'd like to make like a celebrity apology video against like a wall and just be
Front
like,
facing, yeah.
we didn't know.
We
And now that our press team has told us to apologize.
yeah, we were. But also, I will point out, we know wet bulb is not sexy, but you also said it leads to extreme danger. Danger. So.
And Spencer,
We're
we would like
sorry. We
would like to
we would
reissue
like to
a new apology.
Yes.
So why does this matter? Because there actually are basically 4 times in the Earth's history in relation to us, human epochs. The first is when there were no humans. Why? Because we've extended this graph to when it was 15, 10, 5, 10, 15, oops, wow, even 20 degrees hotter than it is now, which is why there were no humans when there were dinosaurs. Why the species on the planet were ones that needed heat from the atmosphere, not offloaded it to the atmosphere.
So like humans, and so if dinosaurs were comfortable, humans would feel really hot if they were able to coexist.
No, the dinosaurs would be very cold.
Dinosaurs would be very cold and humans would be very hot.
That's correct.
And then the humans would be to the dinosaurs like, can you make it colder?
Yeah, and maybe the dinosaurs would be like humans, I'm already wearing a sweater.
Yeah.
Like this is, like you need to do something. Okay, I do enough.
Yeah.
I'm a dinosaur.
And then the humans are like, this is like the duvet all over again. Like, I just can't, why don't you put on 2 sweaters?
Yeah, and the dinosaur's like, don't bring up the duvet,
Yeah.
okay? I thought we committed to move past the duvet. And then maybe the dinosaur would be like, I don't know, human, maybe you're on your period.
And then the dinosaurs went extinct.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah, that's what.
Is that science?
Is that science?
It's science adjacent.
Wow.
Heck yeah.
Wow. I've never been slapped down so hard.
I thought we were celebrating.
No.
Science adjacent?
No.
I'll take it.
So the reason we're gathered, though, the reason Futera is having us here, the reason we are convened, is we are outside the green band. At 1.2 degrees C, which is where we were last year, we're about to talk about where we are this year and where we'll be soon, we're outside of the band of civilization. And that matters in very practical ways, not just for our bodies, but for everything about civilization. Because climate change then isn't just about warmer temperatures, it's about instability. It's about not being able to plan and about being outside of the range that people planned for. And those plans are embodied in everything around us. And what I want you to see is that that stable climate was the foundation, and the foundation is cracking. And everything above it is getting tippy.
So even, like, let's say comedy's at the top. That's a long way
For us to fall.
for us to fall.
Well, it's good that you're looking out for everybody else.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the interesting things is dealing with all of this is going to be not about just figuring out which lime slice you're in, which level you're at, but knitting these levels together.
Okay.
And the way to do that is to incorporate climate literacy into everything we do. Whether it's into your comedy, whatever your job is, it has a comedy and climate dimension to it. Bringing climate into your work, whatever that work is relevant, because there's lots of stuff we just didn't have to think about before. Because they were built into norms, they were built into standards. They were built into our storm sewers, which were built for ranges, as were our buildings, as were our electrical systems, as were our cultural practices, like when is vacation for children? When is recess?
I've got a pitch. City storm sewers are different, okay?
Yeah.
This radically changes the environment for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Are you familiar with their homes?
Yeah.
This changes everything. And I think if we center the turtles that have been mutated and have learned the skills of ninja and are also teenagers, which we don't talk about enough, right? They're also like, I'll be in my room, right? I think it's time to center them in. Futera, are you listening?
Yeah.
That feels more science than science adjacent.
You're getting closer.
I'm just upset about seasonal sports because I care about curling so much for 3 days once every 4 years.
The thing that's at the very bottom of this is agriculture. And what humans did, because they could anticipate, because they could plan, and because they are adaptable, they figured out how to raise crops even in places where it might only rain for a couple weeks a year, as long as those rains came on time, as long as they came in a pattern that was well understood. And so this is why one of the main messages of Probable Futures is we need to learn to live well in these changes, because we're going to have to knit a lot of things together. But the other reason is there's a lot of focus on mitigation. We're going to get to zero carbon, and we absolutely need to do that to stabilize the bottom. But there's no way we stabilize the bottom if the top is in chaos. If the top is a mess, if everything in between is unstable, and there's a very specific set of reasons for that, that actually have to do with decarbonization. Because clean energy assets rely on an even more robust civilization than fossil fuels. Clean energy assets are shared, they are networked, they require long-term contracts and commitments. They require an enormous amount of trust. They require different levels of institutions to coordinate. Fossil fuels, they're anonymous, they're portable, they are the fuel of a low-trust world.
People, have you heard this? Gen Z's using that to break up with each other? Like they're like, hey, it's like a fossil fuel world we're living in. It's like low trust. I think we should see other people.
And then they're like, we can make it work. And then you're like, no, I'm sorry, you're just too invaluable in war and crisis. I can't.
Just wish we
not,
could.
yeah, I just wish we could.
So to live well, we're going to need to prepare. I'm going to hand the clicker back to Alison to get us there.
All right. Speaking of stability, I feel a little unstable on this, so I'm going to stand up. So to live well, we need to prepare. Thankfully, we have a lot of tools and resources that can help communities prepare. And when I say communities, I mean a business or an industry or a homeowners association or a city or a family. Communities at all different levels of those lime slices need to prepare. And we have made some tools available to help that process. So the maps I'm going to show you now and kind of orient you to are available on probablefutures.org. We're going to start with these global maps, and then Spencer's going to dive into some more specific locations. So we're going to come back to that concept of wet bulb temperature here, now that we have had such an education in it. Each one of our maps starts with a past climate scenario, because we need to understand what climate assumptions we've made in the past, what our current world is built around, what our baseline is. So all of these maps start at a half a degree of warming. That represents the time period of 1971 to 2000. And then we move through different warming scenarios. 1 degree, which is about a proxy for where we are right now. The Earth has already warmed about 1.2 degrees beyond pre-industrial temperature. 1.5, which is impending. These are the scenarios that we really need to prepare for. 2, 2.5, and 3 are still very much choices, and we need to understand what those worlds look like so that we're motivated and know what we are avoiding. So we're looking at a little bit of a lower threshold than Spencer showed earlier. So 82 degrees Fahrenheit wet bulb, so 82 degrees Fahrenheit and 100% humidity. It corresponds with that just plain danger, not extreme danger category on that table there. And what you can see, even though it's a lower threshold, it still is a very rare occurrence for this to happen in many places around the world. Still, much of this map is gray here, which means 0. And the places that are highlighted, the places that are in green mean it might happen 1 to 3 days a year in an average year. The blues are anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks, and the reds are more than 2 weeks or more than a month. So I'll move to 1 degree of warming here. I'll just move back and move forward again, just so you can see just between the past climate and 1 degree of warming, which is about where we are now, how significant these changes are. We're seeing these colors really expand in the tropics, but also in the southeastern United States, in eastern China. 1.5 degrees of warming. We see it expand even further. 2, 2.5, and 3. These are really striking, significant changes at 3 degrees of warming here. So why does wet bulb temperature change so dramatically? This is one of the climate variables that really changes most significantly as the atmosphere warms, and there's a reason for that. If you understand this one concept about how the climate is going to change in a warmer atmosphere, you will understand a lot. And that's that warmer air holds more moisture. The atmosphere is like a sponge. In fact, for every 1 degree warmer the air temperature is, it can hold 7% more water. So what does that mean? Well, it means, first of all, warmer air is thirstier air. It draws water, it draws moisture from the land, and then the atmosphere can hold it up there for longer. So it creates elongated dry periods below, hangs it up there for longer, and then when it does come down, it has the potential to come down in much greater quantities, in deluges rather than gentle showers.
So there's more humidity in the air, so potentially more precipitation, correct?
Yeah.
So like
Close.
theoretically, from a scientific, I heard yes, Alison. So theoretically, from a scientific perspective, it could rain men if the barometer got low.
Yeah, and you said that the atmosphere was thirsty.
Yeah.
Those are your words, Alison.
Yeah.
We're just quoting you.
Yeah.
So-
And famous climate scientists, the weather girls.
It's in the name. It's just, all we're saying is the prophecy will be fulfilled.
Yes.
Right. Pratama, I guess anything's possible,
Okay,
right?
yes,
But
again,
it's
okay.
not exactly probable, I would say.
Okay, I heard yes.
All right, so let's move on and look at a map of drought. So what we're looking at is the likelihood of a period, a 12-month or more period where the conditions for extreme drought are met. And so drought is different relative to the climate of where you are. So a drought in New York is going to be very different from a drought in Brasilia, which is going to be very different than a drought in Bangkok, for example. This map understands that. It takes that into consideration. So what we will be looking at here is the changing probability of what used to be an extreme drought. And what used to be an extreme drought was a drought that happened about 5% of the time in any given area. So I'll move forward to 1 degree of warming here. And what we can see is that many places around the world are now this kind of pea green color, which represents now that old 5% chance drought is now somewhere between 11 and 20%. Move forward to 1.5 here, and we see a lot of places, particularly the Amazon and some of these kind of Mediterranean regions, move into that yellow category, which is 22 to 30% probability. So that means what used to be essentially a 1 in 20 year event, 1 in 20 year drought in this yellow color, it means it's now a 1 in 5 year, 1 in 4 year, 1 in 3 year event. That means it's really not an aberration anymore. It's not necessarily drought anymore. That means those places are simply becoming more arid. And at 2, 2.5, and 3, we see massive changes all over the world. We need to avoid these scenarios at all costs. Going to precipitation, so a similar kind of map, but looking at precipitation. So this is the change in frequency of the 1 in 100 year storm. 1 in 100 year storm is a concept that's used regularly in meteorology. It's used in building codes. It's used in insurance. And what it means is it's a storm with a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So it's the big, rare storm. At 1 degree of warming, any place that's in blue here is at least twice will potentially see that 1 in 100 year storm twice as frequently. And then as I move through 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3, the darker the blues, the more frequently those places are likely to see increasing frequency of that 1 in 100 year storm.
So this is heavy. These are hard things to look at. And there are often 2 instincts that come from that. One is denial, and the other is a kind of forced optimism. It's going to work out. I don't know how. We like Rebecca Solnit's framing of this, which is that optimism is non-participatory. Optimism is somebody's going to take care of it. It's going to be okay. I don't know why. Hope is a more active, engaged mindset. And it's one that is participating. And we really think that preparing is a hopeful act. It would be nice to stay under 1.5. It's extraordinarily unlikely. Building our worldview around if we go past 1.5, we've lost or failed is a fragile way to approach the future. Whereas saying we can do things at whatever level it gets to while avoiding the higher levels is an act of hope. It's an act of engagement. It's associative as opposed to disassociative. And I just want to ground this in where we are right now. This is the temperature of the atmosphere's history going back just to 1970. And at the very end is the estimate for this year, 2023. It's not clear exactly how it'll turn out exactly at the end, but the band of that is between 1.3 and 1.5. And next year, 1.5 has a pretty high likelihood of being reached for the first time. And so thinking about 1.5 as a limit beyond which we can't work, can't live, is a dangerous mindset. But saying we can figure out how to live well in these challenging environments is a way to move forward at the same time as we are as we're mitigating. And so to show you what this means, to take it back from, we've talked in averages and in global maps. I'm going to wish for a map that just shows us what the Earth looks like. So it's not quite what the Earth looks like, but it's aerial satellites. You're familiar with Google Maps. This is just Google Maps. And we're going to talk about Panama, because Esteban used to live in Panama.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was 25 years old, I Eat, Pray, Loved. Highly recommend it. If you haven't, combining all three, brilliant. So I Eat, Pray, Loved. I legitimately sold all my things and went and lived in an eco-community. I was going through a breakup. To answer your question, yes. So I sold all my belongings, and I lived in this eco-community called Kalyala. It's like this totally sustainable town. We grew all our own food. We had all renewable energy, and I lived for all intents. It's like people from all over the world. Really, really fun experiment in sustainable living. And for all intents and purposes, I lived in a tent for 2 years in Panama.
And so in Panama is very close to the equator. And was it hot?
Yeah, it was very hot, and it was very humid. Yeah.
So it's humid there because there's ocean on both sides. There's a lot of sources of water. And the places near the equator are right around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Everywhere around the equator. So if you go to Singapore, which is basically right on the equator, and you look at the temperature distribution, the high temperature in June is 90, the high temperature in July is 90, the high temperature in August is 89. 90 degrees has been historically the temperature, basically, of the equator. So how many days were above 90 degrees C? I know this will be hard to see from the back, but I'll walk you through it. What you can do is click in on any one location. The little boxes are 22 kilometers on a side, and see what's the range, because climate is about ranges. It's not perfect forecast. It's not one thing happens over and over again. It's some years are warmer, some are cooler, some are wetter, some are drier. We need to know what happens to those ranges, because a changing climate is changing those ranges. And so the range in Panama was that in a warm year, it might be the warmer year here is the 95th percentile for people who are statistically inclined. Cooler year is the 5th percentile. So in cooler years, there's only be one day where it passed 90 degrees. And in a warmer year, it would be 92. That's a wide range. But what happens when we go from 0.5 to 1? That range goes from 4 to 131. The range gets wider. The lower end of the range doesn't change very much, but the higher end changes a lot. And the middle, the average, changed by more than 20 days. You go up another degree, and now it's between 16 and 160, roughly. And what you see by looking closely in places is that the distribution changes in different places. In some places, the whole thing just shifts. In other places, it gets wider and wider. Climate science helps us understand that. Getting familiar with where you live, what it was like, is actually a very grounding experience. It actually is good to know. And I don't know what that's like. I grew up in Michigan. I don't actually know if these are bad numbers. They seem like big numbers to me. But in Panama, they might say, well, it's already hot. That's just a little bit hotter. We can deal with that. I don't know. So we made this data available in this way with our science partners so that people where they live, in their community, whatever that community is, can bring it in to their decision making, to their language, have a literacy they share. And Esteban, I want to ask you about nights. Was it easy to sleep?
Some nights were pretty hot, and then you'd like open up the tent and try to get airflow, but then I would also get scared about bugs.
I'm also scared of bugs.
Yeah, and howler monkeys. Does anyone know what howler monkeys sound like? Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to demonstrate? Yeah. Those are my nightmares. So it was tough to sleep, and then you would try to adapt, and it was an imperfect adaptation.
So nighttime temperature, like wet bulb temperature, is another thing we're going to have to understand better, pay more attention to. because nights are warming faster than days, because the greenhouse effect keeps in the heat of the day. So we have actually twice as many roughly record hot nights as we do record hot days. There's all this attention on the high temperature, not as much on the low temperature. And low temperatures matter for health in so many ways because the body does so many things when it sleeps, especially for children. Children who go through a hot night have a lot of challenges the next day. There's already evidence in the United States, for example, that test scores are going down for children in places where it's hot the night before a test. Cognition isn't as good. And so we need to figure out how to live in these circumstances. And look how big this range was from 24 to 306. And we go up to, actually I started, but anyway, what this becomes is basically every night in Panama by 2 degrees C. The range is from half the year to almost every single day. And I don't know, again, this is a temperature range, the temperature level that scientifically is hard for the human body, but we may find there are ways to eke out a couple more degrees, make living a little bit easier, but also maybe low tech and you had no fan.
Yeah.
Not everybody needs indoor air conditioning. But when we talk about indoor air conditioning, Pratima, I think you know something about air conditioning.
Yes, I grew up in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. I lived there till I was 16. I'm not trying to compete with Esteban, but we were covered in howler monkeys.
Oh, don't even.
But yeah, there was summer, and that was the only season. So you went from your air-conditioned house into the air-conditioned car, and then you'd go to air-conditioned school, or air-conditioned mall, or air-conditioned friends' home, or air-conditioned Chili's, and those were all the options.
And the reason you can see that Jeddah is also on an ocean, on the Red Sea here, but in contrast to Panama, which was green, this is a desert that it's on the edge of. And people live on the coast because just between the desert and the ocean, there were these green spaces where people could live. But this is a shallow sea. And the shallow seas are taking up a lot of heat. The heat is being absorbed by the oceans faster than it's being absorbed by the atmosphere. And the dynamic of living on this coast is going to change a lot. And so what you see is in the past, this 30, this was this was danger in that graph. 30 would happen a few days a year in the past. Might not happen, might happen a couple weeks. But when you go to 1 degree C, it still might not happen, this very dangerous thing. So if you think about outdoor work, you think about how you move around. But it also might be 43 days. And these are the 5th and 95th. The tails are even further away. And if you go up to 1.5, it still might not happen. It's these stubborn ranges that are different by place. And that's a real challenge for municipality. We talk a lot to municipalities about what the changes they're going to make in their city. What do they need to prepare for? Do they still need snowplows? Do they need to have the architecture of the schools be different? Do they need to have timing of things be different? At 2 degrees C, it's quite different, but still not like there are years where it won't happen. And you also have family in Mumbai.
My parents live in Mumbai, yeah. There are monkeys there. That's not a joke.
So monkeys and parents live in India.
Yeah.
And when do you go see your parents?
I see my parents October to March, so that I don't have to go there during summer or monsoon because it's too much. I don't know how to deal with it.
So monsoon, I confess, I've never experienced a monsoon personally. The amount of rain in a monsoon is very hard to comprehend if you haven't experienced it. But the data helps us at least imagine it. And so what this tells us, so Mumbai, in the past, the 1 in 100-year storm had 903 millimeters of rain. Most of you are inches people, so you don't know if that's a thimble or a keg. You don't know. That's 36 inches of rain in one day. And what the number above it says is between 0.5 and 1 degree C, that 1 in 100-year storm has an additional 98 millimeters, or an additional 4 inches. That warmer air holds that much more. Well, remember, 1 degree C is already in the past. 1.5 is around the corner. These changes, as Alison talked about with wet bulb, are nonlinear. Because when you go to the next, to 1.5, now you're adding 171 millimeters. This is 7 additional inches of rain on top of the 36 inches of rain. So 7 inches of rain is probably beyond the 1 in 100-year storm in Manhattan. So you're adding someone else's 1 in 100-year storm on your 1 in 100-year storm that already was enormous. And if you go to 2 degrees C, it's adding an additional 13 inches of rain on top of the 36. It's just hard to comprehend. And yet there are people who are living in situations like this. We've had conversations at Probable Futures with people in climate adaptation in Bangladesh. And they're like, look, we've learned how to deal with flooding. We've learned how to be more adaptable. We actually had a conversation with an organization that said, after the big floods that you read about in Pakistan that killed so many, they said if those same floods happened in Bangladesh, no one would have died. Because our alerts, our warnings, people's awareness, people's ability to adapt has been developed. And that's not to say it's easy, but to say that it can happen. And now I'm going to bring it to somewhere nearby. We're going to do the northeastern United States, which, as you can see here, is forested. It's lush. I know it doesn't feel like it. There are paintings of fake plants on the walls to make us have the feeling of, there's a leaf on your wall here, in case you didn't know it, Futura people. You look puzzled, but there's a leaf here I can see that's somehow soothing. But actually, it's a green place. And one of the things we didn't really worry about were forest fires. But you live here.
I do live here.
What's your recent experience with forest fires? Was it on fire here?
The sky was sepia, like orange. And it was truly the first time in my life, which is weird having lived in New York City, but it was the first time in my life I was like, I feel like I'm aware of the toxicity suddenly.
Yeah.
But then I went into the subway, so clearly it didn't. I was fine.
So why did that happen? There were fires, not here, but in Canada. And the reason is the risks of wildfire went up substantially. This is the change in the number of days that have the right conditions for wildfires. So between 0.5 and 1, you see some changes here. We didn't actually have a lot of these 5, 10 years ago, but we're now close to 1.5. And look what happens to that change everywhere. This means that the plants are in a different climate. A lot of those plants are not really well adapted to that particular place or mix of temperature. And so this is a regional. I'm not zooming in anywhere in particular, because forest fire isn't actually a local problem principally. It's a systems problem, and we are part of systems, communities that straddle borders. The Canadian smoke didn't stay in Canada. And understanding that this is a local, regional, and global problem may sound overwhelming, but it also is connecting. It also is a way to feel affinity, to feel association. And we're going to need that as places become more like other places. So a lot of people in the East would say, I don't know how those people in California do it, how they live. I mean, if I saw it was orange sky in San Francisco, I would never live there. And then it happened here on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday, they're like, oh, I guess this is what it is. That change is a kind of adaptation, but we wanted to have that adaptation be productive, not just resigned. And an understanding of these can be helpful. And so what we need to do, now maybe you have a better understanding of what these lines that knit this lime slices together, knit these tiers together. It's a mix of understanding, agreements, communities building in various ways. It's lots of professions. I worked for 20 years in finance, and people in finance think that finance is the foundation of civilization. It's at the very top. It's like the first thing to go. And
So are we at the top with finance?
no, actually, you're down here. Comedians help build community. Comedians help us tell stories.
We're more important than finance.
Or
That's right.
like lawyers?
Law? Do you mind? I'm gonna call
Can
my
we
mom.
say it for mom?
Yeah, I'm gonna put it on speaker.
And then we'll send it to my mom too.
Yeah. I'll loop your mom in with my mom.
Yeah.
We'll start a group text.
Yeah.
And so one of the things to get about that is there's going to need to be some more transgressional skills. People being a little more generalist. Comedians are transgressional. They get in other people's business. People who stay in their own lanes expect everything else to work out. And so part of being adaptable, being resilient, is understanding that these things are connected.
In other words, climate needs to be a part of everyone's story, needs to be part of the story of every single community. And we think that this quote by Dorothy Fortenberry really encapsulates it beautifully. She's a writer and producer for The Handmaid's Tale and for other popular shows, and she says if climate isn't in your story, it's science fiction. Because climate change is here, and if we don't engage with it and we don't incorporate it into our planning, into our decision making, we are engaging in a kind of fantasy. And I want to conclude today with another thing that we often don't hear about in the climate conversation. I want to conclude with some gratitude. Because the climate, no, it's not as perfect as it once was, as that perfect green band there. But it's still pretty great. In fact, it's way better than Mars. Like so much better than
Get
Mars.
after it, Alison. Yeah, you're going down, Mars.
Mars is going to be
I'll say that Mars has had it too good for too long, and we're finally calling them out.
Yeah. Can they can't hear. Can they hear us?
Yeah, they can. Anyone here
Actually,
representing
They
Mars?
actually can't hear you because there's no atmosphere.
Oh!
And so sound doesn't travel.
Truths.
Yeah!
We
See,
love
science
that.
adjacent's fun.
Ah.
Again,
We
this
truly-
feels like a dagger to the heart every time you say that.
Seriously, though, we truly live on the best planet in the galaxy, and it's amazing that we know so much. We understand so much about how the world works, and we know how to live on it sustainably. That's incredible. We need to have some gratitude for that, engage with that, and build the most resilient communities possible. And if you're looking for some suggestions, suggestions on what resilient activities may be, they may be some things that you don't expect. Knowing how to cook is a resilient activity. Cooking, dancing, hanging out with friends, making art. You can also make out and hang art. Playing games,
Wet ball.
playing sports, and telling jokes. So, as the comedians say, that's our time. We are going to answer some questions, but I hope you'll follow along with Probable Futures and also with the Climate Comedy Cohort as well.
Yeah, and we want to say on behalf of everyone, screw you, Mars! No, in all honesty, screw you, Mars. No, we have to leave them. Is it me? I'm too much on the Mars bit. Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. I know this is a experiment in like comedy and climate storytelling. So thanks so much for inviting us in. And
In return,
we did the science. So now you have to do comedy. So tonight we've got a midnight show.
a midnight open mic that will start at 1 a.m.
Yeah, and it's in the basement of a bar in Brooklyn, and the TV will be on, and it will be loud. And if you ask the owner to turn it off, he will yell at you.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you both there.
And no trains go there or leave the area.
Oh yeah, it's completely isolated.
Yes.
And yeah, but you have to do it to become a comedian somehow.
So, you're inducted now. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.
So we have time for some questions. Not a lot, but some time for some questions. We'd love to engage with you, and there are some questions that were
Online
submitted
questions
online
as
as well. But we'll start with you.
Thank you. I usually preface my questions that might seem like ignorant questions, silly questions with, sorry if this is a stupid question, but I'm not going to do that this time. Why, as a culture, as a scientific community, are we saying 1.5 degrees in the U.S. when, like, we live in Fahrenheit world? And I mean, I don't know if that's, like, resonating with people as much as it would be to say, like, 32 point blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if this is, like, a reasonable question, but it's something I've been wondering for quite a few months now, and I've never asked it to anyone. But
It's a great question.
I've just been wondering.
It's a great question. So actually, a couple of the scientists who help build Probable Futures are in the back. They're not the people that answer this question, but if we run into a question we can't answer, we actually have buddies in the audience. But I can help answer this question. And the reason I bring that up is that Probable Futures mostly made up of people who did something else for a living and discovered climate change and changed their career. came from outside of climate because what they discovered was people did not understand. We're trying to build a bridge between the science and culture, and that bridge, some of it is language, some of it is data, and some of it is little bits of literacy, like the wet bulb stuff, like the warmer air holds more moisture. There's another one called albedo. It's a fancy sounding word. It's the difference between wearing a white shirt and a black shirt in the sun. It's just how reflective the surface of the Earth is. There are all of these ideas in climate science that turn out to be intuitive to kids, to anybody. And I actually spent a career working on really hard topics that I kind of barely understood. This is not like this. This just requires your middle school education and being in touch with the Earth. But a lot of it had built around it jargon and numbers that made it distant. And part of that is us just taking it for granted. And I'll put this in a US schools context. There was no AP Earth science for a long time in the United States. Like the Earth was just boring. It just sat there. Why would you learn more about that? And so there's this notion of being interested in the world. So part of the answer is the Fahrenheit world. I think that was the alternative choice for America. It was either Fahrenheit world or America for naming the continent by the white people. But Fahrenheit world just didn't really care. And the rest of the world actually got on to centigrade because at 0 you have freezing. And 100 you have boiling water. And that's intuitive. And Fahrenheit's totally unintuitive. But we were like, fuck it, I don't care. I'll stick with 32 and these small numbers that don't mean anything, and then I'll get an app that tells me what to wear. Because I don't know actually what 65 degrees and 40% humidity is. But I think that the bridge has to go both ways. You might have to learn a little bit of math, but it's basically like, can I do Celsius? It's not that hard. And other times, though, the science needs to find better words. And we should all be engaged in finding better words and better stories for that. And so Americans chose to not use global standards, almost all of which were more intuitive. And it was because we just didn't care as much about there being a kind of societal literacy. And so we can correct that now, and that would be a form of resilient behavior, but it'll be a little bit of work, but we're here to tell you it's not like AI or CRISPR, which you will never understand.
We will never understand. Yeah. I have a question here from the online audience. So what would you say to people who say, now only the South is more affected, I'm not, and I'll no longer be here when these changes happen, so why bother? So I'm happy to take that one. That is one of the reasons that we created Probable Futures, and it's one of the reasons that we created it and worked with the scientists to get data that scaled down to that 22-kilometer area everywhere in the world. And it's one of the reasons that we start with that framework of the line slices, showing how climate stability underpins everything, because it's not just about being hot, it's about the instability. Every single place on Earth is changing. Every single place on Earth has assumptions of climate stability built into it in very different ways. You can zoom in anywhere on the globe, click on a cell, and it will show you how that place is changing. And I guarantee if you find a person and speak with a person in that location, they can tell you what it's going to mean there. And we spend a lot of our time doing that and hearing these stories. So it is not just about the extreme things happening in the global South. It is very much about that, and we can't turn away from that. We're hitting very serious thresholds there, but it is not relegated to just one area of the world, and that is the endeavor that we're engaged in.
And the other way to think about that is that the more rich a society is, invariably the more specialized it is. Invariably, actually, the less people understand the world around them.
And the less prepared they are for bad things to happen.
Exactly. So I happen to have a friend, Pedro, who grew up with divorced parents. One said in San Diego, and the other said in Tijuana. And he's like, in San Diego, if the power goes out for 30 minutes, everybody loses their mind. In Tijuana, no one expects the power to work all the time. And so what's the infrastructure for that? You know what it is? It's friends. It's like knowing how to make rice and beans. It's not living with an empty refrigerator and Uber Eats on your phone and thinking it'll all work out somehow. I don't know how this magic works. That's why we put things like hang out, build resilience. So actually one of the people we collaborated with was the director of sustainability at McKinsey, and he would tell this story. My friend Dickon would tell the story about how friends of theirs in Northern California had their house burned down. And he would say the most valuable piece of infrastructure they had was a car to get away. And I would amend that story and say, no, actually, Dickon, the most valuable thing they had was you, because you were their friends, because the friends moved in for a year. They had a place to go, to live for a year. They didn't just start swiping on Airbnb and trying to frantically find somewhere else to go. Someone was looking out for them. There was somewhere they could go. And in the same way those resources of clean energy are shared, the resources of resilience are shared. And in many cases, the people who are at the top of that tower are the least aware of what held it together on the way down. And so resilience can be learned both ways. And so I think this idea that it's going to happen to someone else is great naivete.
So we have 1 minute left. Do we have any questions for Pratima and Esteban, or?
Yeah.
Hands
Yeah.
flew down.
Only scientifically complex questions for us.
Yeah.
I was going to say, tell us about the climate comedy cohort. How can we follow, get involved?
Wow, what a great question.
Tee up.
Thanks so much. We are out of time. It's called a cliffhanger. So with Generation 180, it's this, and the Center for Media and Social Impact, they're at American University. We co-created this thing called the Climate Comedy Cohort. We're in our 2nd year. We train professional comedians at a really high level, connect them to climate experts, do climate education, and then we sort of do almost like writer's room and building community around it so we can all write jokes. And then we make videos. Last year we worked with Comedy Central. This year we have wonderful partners. Last year we went on a big tour. This year we're doing a live show and also looking at what touring looks like. So we do videos and live shows all around it. And it's a few things. One, it's like climate communications. One, it's engaging comedians who we say are like climate curious and making them be sort of agents in change in their community, especially as you continue rising up in entertainment and you get to tell more of your own stories and you get to have a little bit more agency of the stories you tell. And I also think comedians are great communicators, right? So it's like we're both stand-ups and comedians. Like I'm a stand-up and I travel and go to places that don't have a lot of conversations like this. So I get to have a bit of that. So I could nerd out a lot more. We can chat after, but to me, comedy is just really, I think it's exciting. Comedy's like, it's like poetry and science is like prose and each comedy can reach hearts and mind, and emotions in a way that's a little bit different. So it's fun to combine both, and it's also fun to think about what just comedy looks like.
And maybe I can end with a pitch, which is that working with them made us better. We worked hard on trying to tell these stories, and then somebody said, you should work with them. We're like, yeah, well, we tell our stories. We got our thing. It's pretty slick. It works well. No, you
The
should
women in the 3rd row right here is
That's
who
right.
said we should.
Yeah.
They were like, you should try this. We're like, all right, we'll try. And we got better. We got better because we brought more people in who could make us think harder about how to tell those stories. And so as a plug for the comedy cohort, they can make you better.
Yeah.